today we are beginning our study of art from the history of Utah. And we're starting at the very beginning with the Fremont people and their petroglyphs. So, first let's take a look at a brief timeline of Utah. We have here 2,000 years ago, this is where we're starting, year zero, the ancestral Pueblo civilizations and the Fremont cultures lived in Utah. They lived there for over 1,000 years. And then about a couple of hundred years after that, the modern American Indian cultures that we know rose out of the dust of the ancestral Pueblo and Fremont cultures. And they lived there happily until in the 1800s, the Mormon settlers and other people from the colonies and the eastern side of the United States of America came to Utah. And at that point, they lived there until less than 100 years later when Utah received statehood. And now we have now. So, we're going to be studying this year, this entire chunk of time, but we're going to focus right now in this orange time period that lasted for over 1,000 years. So, the Fremont people, we can find their name here in this gray color, and this is an interesting map. It's showing primarily the Anasazi borders, and you can see that they stretch into Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. This is the Four Corners area. There is one state that is not labeled. What state is that? It is Utah. You can see this blue thing is the Salt Lake. So the Fremont people lived in Utah, in most of the entire state, actually, including right around the Great Salt Lake where we live here in Magna. So, what are petroglyphs? Petroglyphs are a type of rock art that has been pecked into the surface of a rock, as opposed to painted on top of the rock. Fremont petroglyphs were created by using sharp tools to peck and chip away at the desert varnish, a dark layer on the outside of rocks created from rainfall and bacteria. The oldest petroglyphs from before the Fremont people are becoming recovered by the varnish over time. Let me explain that a bit. So imagine that there's a big rock wall, and over time, over hundreds and thousands of years, dust from just the world around it. So over time, over hundreds of years, dust and just the growiness of the world starts to discolor the rocks, and they have a slightly different color. But that's not the rock itself. That's just the dust and everything on top of it. That's what they're calling the desert varnish, and it's this red discoloration. So if you take a tool like a chisel and you cut into the discoloration, you expose the original color of the rock underneath. And that is how petroglyphs were formed. So here's an example of one. This is called a family petroglyph. It's in 9 Mile Canyon in Utah, and the 9 Mile Canyon is the most concentrated place to see rock art in the entire United States. So that's a really cool place to go. In the very bottom of the canyon, the Fremont would build farms to grow their food. So we can see here a family, as is labeled. We have 2 adults. We have a child, and it looks like this could be another child, and that child has a, what is that? Bow and arrow. And then we see some animals with them, all around them. So think about, what do you think the Fremont people here value? If they're spending the time to use a chisel to cut into this reddish varnish of the rock, what do they value? I would say that they probably value their family. Here's another example of a petroglyph. This one is very clear. We have 2 people and a whole herd of antelope that they're hunting. Now this panel is called the Mckee Springs panel, and it is in Dinosaur National Monument. Dinosaur National Monument, by the way, is the place where we like to go on our adventure trip. Unfortunately, we can't go on that adventure this year. You'll be doing a different one with Mr. Sterland. But it is this petroglyph is one of the largest Fremont petroglyphs ever discovered. And right now, archaeologists believe that hollow petroglyphs like this represent women, and solid petroglyphs like this represent men. So if we go back to here, they're both seem to be solid. This one has a bit more of a hollow bit. So all of the petroglyphs here potentially are representing men if archaeologists are correct in this assumption. So this petroglyph is interesting. They're holding something. Now, I would love to hear what you think they're holding. It'd be great for you to tell me in the comments of this video, and what you think is going on, and what value you think they're representing. By the way, this image shows the size a little bit better. You can see how large it is compared to the grasses around it and how it takes up this entire wall of rock. And if we were to be on our adventure trip, this is where Entheos likes to camp, and the spring is all the way over here. It's across multiple mountains. So it's close, but definitely not close enough to visit. This is called hunting scene. This is a hunting scene that's shown on a rock called Newspaper Rock in San Juan, which is in southern Utah. And this Newspaper Rock has over 600 petroglyphs from many cultures, not just the Fremont people, but many different cultures. Due to its easy accessibility, meaning that as people we can take an easy hike to get to Newspaper Rocks, it is one of the most visited petroglyph sites in Utah. This is Newspaper Rock in its entirety, and you can see lots and lots of different cultures and different people, different styles. They came and they carved their petroglyphs into the rock. I like this one. This one is a rabbit, and you can see its ears, and its little head, and its body, and its legs. It is on Legend Rock in Hot Springs County in Wyoming. Now, Wyoming is not part of that map I showed you where the Fremont people live, is it? Wyoming is significantly far away from where the Fremont were living. Legend Rock is presumed to be a sacred pilgrimage site for the Fremont and other ancient natives. The Utah Fremonts and other groups traveled to Wyoming and left their marks on Legend Rock. So, just how far is Legend Rock? Well, if we assume that our Fremont people lived in Magna, that is a 125-hour walk for them to get to Legend Rock. 125 hours. If they were walking 12 hours a day from sunup to sundown, they are walking for 10 days to get there. And then 10 days to get back. So why is that so important to them? Why do you think they would go on such a long walk to get to a place? Well, we can't know for sure, but we do assume that Legend Rock had some sort of religious purpose, or maybe it was a trading ground or something like that. But we know that they valued whatever it was that they were walking that far. You wouldn't walk for 10 days unless you valued something an awful lot. So here we have an image of the petroglyph compared to a human hand, so you can see just how large it is. And I also want to point out something. This is always a good discussion to have. Right above the petroglyph, we see a modern petroglyph. We can see some writing. Maybe it's someone's initials. We're not exactly sure what they were writing. And so I want to ask, why are we studying these petroglyphs in art class and not this? What values does this show? What values do this show? I'm not going to stand here, or sit here rather, and tell you the answers, because this is a question for you. What makes a petroglyph art and this writing graffiti? Why is graffiti bad and this is not? We actually will discuss this a lot later at the end of the year as well. Now, let's talk about what the Fremont people were doing when they weren't making their petroglyphs. This image is a reproduction of what life might have been like for the ancient Fremont people. We have the petroglyph on the wall. Here looks like a lot of the ones that we had seen that they've carved in. And they are living up on the side of the rock in a cave. They've got their fire and their food, and they have farms down below. And why would that be? This is Range Creek Canyon. This is an example of a canyon where you can find a lot of petroglyphs. This is how it looks now, and this is how most of these canyons looked back 2,000, 1,000 years ago when the Fremont people were alive and doing their work. You can see how green and lush it is down here, but they lived up here in the rocky walls. They came up here for safety. They came up here for protection so that they could have their food and then go back to a stable place to live and sleep. And they put their art up here instead of down here for a couple of reasons. Maybe they put it up there because they wanted it to stick around. It was important. It was hard work. And they knew that if it was in the rock, it wouldn't go anywhere because these rocks hadn't gone anywhere. Whereas if they put it in the dirt, then it would probably be destroyed as soon as the harvest was done. So they have values of telling their stories and sharing things that are important to them. This is 9 Mile Canyon. You can see the same thing. Beautiful, beautiful bright red rocks compared to the lush green that's between them. They would farm and hunt down here and live and make their art up here in these rocks. So, how did the art of the Fremont people reflect their values? I want you to think about that because you're going to be writing your answers to how the culture impacted their values, how the art reflected their values, and I want to hear what you think. We saw a lot of pictures, we had a lot of ideas, so share what you think in that writing assignment, and we are going to actually be creating our own version of petroglyphs as well, so that you can try that technique of carving the art into something. If you have questions, let me know.